Manchester Ship Canal. Following on the success of the the swing bridge one, which has got over 500 views in the during last week. Anyway, Manchester Ship Canal. There's a kind of a rough illustration of it, but I'll come on to a better one in a minute. And it's obviously going from Manchester to Liverpool, two great cities. And I base a lot of what I say on an amazing book that's online by this guy called Cyril J. Wood, called The Big Ditch, which is a supposedly affectionate term for the ship canal. But I think it's a bit disparaging to call it a big ditch, actually. But anyway, that's just me. So I call it the Manchester Ship Canal. And there you can see it a bit better on the right, and showing that there is a lot of other canals as well that were made around about that time. The network of canals, there was a real canal mania in the, especially in the 18th century and early 19th century. And this is more on a map. What the red line is the ship canal. Now I drew that by hand because it wasn't very clear where it was, so it's a bit wobbly, but it gives you the general impression that they decided to go from Manchester to Liverpool in as straight a line as they could, whereas the older Bridgewater Canal is much more kind of meandering, so it doesn't have as many difficulties. Though, as we found out last week with the Swing Aqueduct, there were quite a lot of those as well.
The thing about the Bridgewater is it was built so that there are no locks at all. It finishes with a stop lock just before it goes into the Trent and Mersey, but the stop lock, it was put there because there were different canal companies and they were worried about pinching each other's water, you know, when the water goes low. So they put a stop lock at the end of the Bridgewater before it goes into, is it the Trent and Mersey?
I live within half a mile of the Bridgewater Canal. And I have, you know, I was brought up in Stretford, even closer to it, but I knew surprisingly little about it as well. And then I'm coming on later to Manchester Docks, though, as Derek, I think, would probably agree with, in reality, they should have been called Salford Docks, because very few of the actual parts of the docks were in Manchester itself. The rest were in Salford or Stretford. Going on the history of it, this was actually the dugout canoes. Two of them were found when they were building the digging out of the ship canal in the 1890s, and on locations through where a river had previously existed. So it showed that people were using canoes in the area. This is probably in, well, it doesn't actually give a date on it, but they're very, very old. And in fact, the first, and here's another, there is a local museum, and I've forgotten which one it is now, in near Liverpool, which has got these particular canoes on display. And the first purpose-built inland navigations in England can be attributed to the Romans, because they constructed what are called navigable cuts, known as fosses or dikes, on some of our rivers to bypass navigational hazards. So they used existing rivers, but they would dig them out to make them go further or be more navigable than they were. So this is the Itchen Dyke near Winchester, which ran from there to the sea. So that was a very significant one. There are two different types of locks, which there might be different names for them, but a flash lock is one with a single gate. And these were originally used by the Romans. They were commonly built into small dams or weirs where a head of water was used for powering a mill. So what they do, the lock would allow boats to pass the weir while still allowing the mill to operate when the gate was closed. So it gave it a head of water for the water mill. So a flash lock is pretty basic. It's just a piece of wood trying to stop the river at one point. And these are the pound locks. Any idea where the word pound comes from? Why they're called pound locks? Impound.
Ah, right.
The water is impounded between two gates. A chamber with gates at both ends that control the level of the water, pioneered in China and then in the Netherlands for obvious reasons, because of all their dikes and so forth. A boat enters an empty lock, as you can see on the left, and then eventually the bottom gates are closed, the bottom paddles are closed, and the top paddles are opened. Lock is filling with water, lifting boat to the higher level. So
that's going uphill, downhill. You do the reverse.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it should be obvious, but it's kind of, you have to work it out in your head what's going on here. It's going uphill effectively.
Yeah.
And each time they go, of course, the mass of water that goes into the lock is eventually lost. How exactly is it lost, Jackie? What happens? Why is that lost?
Well, it goes into the next section of canal, and of course, if all the boats one day are all going uphill, you're going to lose an enormous amount of water.
One of the things I wanted to investigate about the Ship Canal is I've heard, but I haven't researched this, that it is incredibly useful in flood control in sort of South Lancashire, because of its ability to let water in and out of it if it's flooding. I don't know. Anyway, now I don't. Have you ever been in this one, Jackie?
That looks familiar. Is it somewhere up on the rock? Is it near Hebden Bridge or somewhere?
Can't you see? It says Tulle Lane Lock, Rochdale Canal.
Yeah, it's on the rock. I recognise it.
It's got a 20-foot drop, which is nearly 25, just slightly under, which is the highest one in England. It's actually a fairly new one because it was built in 1996 to replace 2 previous locks from the original canal system, and it's the deepest lock in the United Kingdom. Whenever you're going on a canal, it's a little tour through history, isn't it? Really,
it is. It's fascinating.
Onto the Ship Canal. The history of this goes back to the 18th century, and Thomas Steers, who was also responsible for Liverpool's first docks and improvements to the River Wear. And it's not very well known, should be, because he did a lot of the work leading up to this. He made a survey of the rivers Mersey and Irwell that would allow unimpeded navigation for craft to Manchester. They even got an act to allow the construction, and it started, but it didn't have enough finance, so it never went right through. Because Daniel Adamson is like every other Victorian engineer. They all look like that, don't they? With huge beards and whatever. The proposed scheme, when it eventually came up, was for the building of a ship canal from the Wirral banks of the River Mersey estuary to a large purpose-built dock complex at Manchester, close to what was then the racecourse. Be following the same general route as the Mersey and Irwell navigation from Runcorn to Manchester, with several new cuts and extensions, plus a completely new section from Eastham to Runcorn, which effectively hugged the banks of the River Mersey and separated from the tidal estuary by an embankment. The canal was to be 35 miles in length, and eventually you'd be 60.5 feet above sea level by the time it reached Manchester, hence needing locks. 5 locks, apparently, there are. Well, why a ship canal? Well, as I pointed out the other week, Manchester's business community viewed the charges imposed by Liverpool Docks and the railway companies as excessive, and they wanted a way to bypass them and cock a snook at Liverpool. A ship canal was proposed to give ocean-going vessels direct access to Manchester, which is quite a visionary idea when you think about it at the time. And another reason was that the region was suffering from the long depression of 1873 to 96. And so they wanted a way to sort of build their way out of it, I think. The Manchester Ship Canal Act was eventually passed at a 3rd attempt, despite being opposed by the city of Liverpool. Right, okay. Anyway, this is Eastham to Ellesmere Ports construction. You can see how vast the kind of amount of digging that was needed on this. This is these are some I think fabulous photos of the of the Navvies. That's onto one side. Digging out the ship canal at Salford Docks. There were 16,000 men were employed, and most of them apparently settled in Manchester and Salford after its completion, which is where and a lot of them were Irish as well. So that's where the Irish connection to Manchester Some 130 labourers died in the waterway construction, and many more were badly injured or disfigured by it. It was, as you can imagine, it was over 7 years of activity. Here's another wonderful photograph. They were using railways to get rid of a lot of the waste.
And presumably those were locks that they were building in the background, which gives you an idea of how massive they are.
The project engineer thought of the idea of building temporary tracks to get rid of soil from the site and also to carry workers to different locations.
Terrible job.
Here's another one. Here they are building one of the many bridges which span the Ship Canal.
Oh, what an awful job.
Yeah, all of it by hand as well. If you know, well, no,
yeah.
it wasn't. No, that's untrue. It's not all by hand. There was, in fact, there was something they called steam navvies that were introduced towards the end of it, which was like steam shovels that they were using. And that's a ship passing through the Barton Swing Bridge in 1910, 6 years after the canal became operational, which is a great photo, isn't it? It's a wonderful photo.
Beautiful, fabulous.
I like this one as well.
Yeah.
Of the narrow boats that were the lifeblood of the canal. I can remember I went to primary school in Stretford, St Anne's, which backed onto the Bridgewater Canal. So we had these going up and down. It's wonderful to be able to go to the wall at the side of the primary school and watch the boats coming down and wave at them. They usually ignored us or shouted at us. They were grumpy a lot, but we got fed up with it. But it was quite a sight.
The navvies, navigators, used to live in wooden huts that they built as they went along. And because they had although they imported many men from Ireland over to here, they had nowhere to live.
Yeah.
And they had to build their own premises.
The contribution of the navvies to this has really got to be acknowledged. It was a fantastic engineering feat, but it was also a fantastic amount of effort that went into it.
This guy at the front about to throw the mooring rope looks very cool and fit, but I really like his cap as well.
Yeah, it's
and he looks
cool
as though
dude,
he's got flares on.
Well, I think it's a wonderful photograph. It's got so much
great photo, yeah.
Fabulous.
Those are the entrance lock gates at Easton, which shows the sheer scale of this is to let ocean-going boats into it. Again, a huge drop in it.
Imagine how many gallons of water.
And this is the Caddy's Head. So this was the opening of the Ship Canal in 1894, with the Norseman being the flagship vessel at the opening of it. And this is the opening ceremony with Queen Victoria, looking a bit miserable in the chair, isn't she? She was on Enchantress on the 21st of May, 1894. She did visit Manchester eventually, but at one time she refused to go to it because it was so horrible. But she was prevailed upon to go to this at the opening ceremony of it, which must have been really quite something. Here's something else. Now, do you know anything about this one, Derek? It's the Runcorn Widnes Transporter Bridge. It's when boats are going through, it goes up, and then when it comes down, the cars go over. So rather than being a swing bridge, it's an up and down bridge. Yeah, okay. The gondola or car suspended by cables from the overhead gantry. I think this must have been a part of the opening of it. Look at all the guys standing around on it. So it must have, or maybe it's while it was being built. I don't know. But it's such an extraordinary photograph, I thought to put it in. There were 9 docks in Salford, Stretford and Manchester at the eastern end of the Ship Canal. And they formed part of the Port of Manchester from 1894 when it was opened until its closure in 1982. So it didn't last 100 years. So whilst there are still big boats going up and down, it's as we know from the development of Salford Quays, it's no longer a proper docks. The ocean-bound vessels were carrying cargo and passengers, often traveling to and from Canada. There was a lot of the trade originally was with America and Canada, and trade, of course, changed later to be Europe and the East. So that had negative effects on both Manchester and Liverpool docks. This is part of the completed pleasing docks prior to the opening of the canal. And it became in 1894, it became the third busiest port in the country, despite it being 40 miles inland. And at its peak in 1958, the canal carried over 18 million tons of cargo.
That boat in the front with the flag and all those people on it, what was that? Was it a ferry or something?
It looks, maybe it's just a way, maybe, as you say, it was a sort of the equivalent of a tourist.
There's a steam, a paddle steamer behind, isn't there?
Yeah, that's great, isn't it? Yeah.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, yeah. Trafford Road Swing Bridge, that was in 1884, and this is Trafford Road Swing Bridge now. Just move you up to over here. And this road here has now become a fixed bridge, and it takes you over from, if you're going from Old Trafford into Salford, and Salford Quays. But it was the larger docks were to the west of this swing bridge, and Pomona docks was to the east, to the right of them. Each section covered 4 docks in total, the largest being in the west. Dock 5 at Pomona was never fully completed. Of the 8 working docks, Dock 1 at Pomona was the only one within Manchester itself. The rest were in Salford or Stretford. So the fact it's called Manchester Docks, as Derek has mentioned before, is a bit unfair on Salford. There was much more Salford docks than Manchester. I looked for the photo of the biggest container ship available, and this, I don't think there were several contenders for it. This was one of them. You can see it's quite a lot of containers on that. When I've seen them coming in and out of Southampton Harbour, I always think, how do they stay upright and when there are heavy seas? They just look so top heavy, don't they? But they must do, because they wouldn't do them otherwise. But containerization was beginning the end in the 1970s, led to a rapid decline. The increased size of freight, or the freight carrying ships like this one, meant they could no longer navigate the Ship Canal. And this, combined with increased trading from Europe and the East, as opposed to America and the West, saw the use of Manchester docks decrease. And in 1982, the remaining docks closed and the area became derelict. This was what it was like before containerization. Huge amounts of dock workers who were often taken on a daily basis. They go to the gates, and a certain number of them will be taken in each day. It was very, very casual, much casual working. The main goods that came in were fruit, raw cotton, oil, petrol, frozen meat. Exports were textiles, machinery, cars, locomotives, and there were 200 cranes. And this is what it's become. Salford Quays and the Manchester Ship Canal looking east. And here's one of the Lowry Centre and Media City. Now, I have my own views on this. I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like certain aspects of it. You can't complain. It has revitalized that area that was becoming derelict. And that
a lot of people in Salford don't like it, Bernard.
Oh, right. So
you're on good ground.
The reason I don't like aspects of it is there's nothing of what was there left.
Absolutely.
And I'll give an example of that. So when I go into it, it feels like Legoland. It doesn't feel like it's got a history. It's just a place where some people rent flats and other people go to work, and that's it. And some people go to the Lowry.
It also emphasizes the class divide and the poverty in Salford. You know, the comparison of the resources that have gone into it and what people have to do in this city, you know.
But one thing from this is a lot of the seamen who came into Manchester would leave it there. There wasn't the same immigration control that you get now. Well, even that's not working very well, is it? Let's not go there. They'd settle in Greengate, which is just near the Irwell, and then when that became difficult for a variety of reasons, they moved to the nearest place that they could get cheap housing, which was Moss Side. And that's how Moss Side became eventually the main destination for African and West Indian immigrants, which I think is interesting, but it's another whole other story. Yeah. But this is the last story, which is about this, about the blue cranes. Now, I remember these. They were there. They were built. They're only built in 1966, and they were light blue in color. They were decommissioned and moved to near where the old main gates were in 1988, and then they were demolished in 2013. And I think it's outrageous. It was the only bit of the docks that was still there. And they, you know, people came to see them, they gave a feel for it, and they got rid of them because they said it was too expensive to stop it rusting. And here I've got, I wonder see if this works. You just bear with me on this one. This was the demolition of them in 2013. They did it at night, or started it at night. Next up, a Lamborghini being driven.
They looked like they were crying.
Yeah.
That's a good way of looking at it, actually. Yeah. So, right, you're here again.
Brilliant.
That was really interesting.
It's I mean, I'm having lived so near to the canal all my life, and only recently being aware of some of the amazing things that are on it. It just left me astonished, actually. It's just incredible, the things that within a few miles of us and nothing like it elsewhere in the world.